Thank you, Rach, and thank you, Mr. Paquet, for answering such a broad range of questions. I hope you all enjoyed this 1 minute of technical break. It seems that for some reason it's easier to go from Brussels to Cluj-Napoca than from Brussels to Brussels. So, okay, that must be the virtual world. In any case, time to jump to the next session. Earlier today, during the workshops, we had some sector-specific discussions on what technology sovereignty means for energy, for aerospace, for health, for cities, and so on and so forth. And it is now time to have a cross-sectoral discussion to evaluate the risks and maybe opportunities as well for European companies in this Europe First context. And well, we also want to assess whether this technology sovereignty policy can endanger European companies' competitiveness. And for this, we will take a global reality check, since we have representatives of European companies, but also an external perspective from Canada. But to run the discussion and to introduce this speaker, it is my pleasure to welcome Carlos Härtel, a director and member of the board of Science Business. And Carlos, over to you.
Marilyn, thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's great to be here. Again, I want to say a warm welcome and hello to everybody out there who's listening and who's viewing today our program, and especially, of course, this panel session, if you will. I do have two distinguished guests and a third person joining us virtually in the virtual session. That happens as well. Let me introduce first the ones who are live with me here to discuss this interesting, relevant, and increasingly upcoming topic. There's first is Nathalie Errard. Nathalie is the Senior Vice President and Head of Europe and NATO Affairs at Airbus, definitely a global company, but also one with a very strong European heritage. And the second person live with me here in the session is Philippe Tanguy. Philippe is today the president of Polytechnique Montreal, so he comes from Canada, but he has been with the French oil and gas major Total in Paris and Berlin for more than 8 years. So he has a European perspective. At the same time, he brings, I would say, a good dose of outside view to our discussion here today. Nathalie and Philippe are joined virtually by our third speaker, who could not make it today to this panel, but was willing to record a separate interview, which we will now soon play. And my dear colleague, Simon Pickard from Science Business, was so friendly to tape this interview over the weekend. And we were asking Ilham Kadri, the CEO of Solvay, about her perspective on the topic of technological sovereignty and what it means in terms of opportunities, but also potentially in terms of pitfalls. So please, if that is ready, could you please roll the tape for us?
A very good afternoon to Dr. Ilham Kadri, Chief Executive Officer at Solvay. Dr. Kadri, we're delighted that you've taken the time to speak with us this afternoon regarding this increasingly hot topic of Europe First policies, and in particular their potential impact on European companies and their competitiveness, both in Europe and at a global level. And perhaps if I can just start with a very obvious question, as these talks around technology sovereignty rise in Europe, is it relevant to Solvay as a company, and why?
Good afternoon, Simon, and thank you for having me. Indeed, Europe has been, in a way, the role model for a rules-based collaborative system, right? In the current global geopolitical context, the value of such a system and the international organization that embody this multilateral approach are under pressure. And as one of the largest integrated markets in the world, the EU can use its weight, its experience, but will require a new European discourse on how we use this power to develop a more robust global system that in fact recognizes the challenges we are currently facing. And this most robust, global system should target, in my mind, a better balance between free trade and free investments we have known so far, and the necessity to respect the Paris Agreement on climate and to address the challenge on biodiversity, for example, or the growing social inequalities, right? So indeed, Europe needs to respond to foreign protectionism with without becoming protectionist itself, serving protectionist interests, right, will ultimately undermine the benefits of global trade and investments. In my mind, to remain ahead of the curve and regain its competitive edge, the EU must definitely adjust its policies to new economic and technological realities, while expanding its competitiveness and geopolitical position. Europe now needs to focus on its relations with the rest of the world, economically, financially, monetarily. Hence, the talks about technology sovereignty in Europe will have a tremendous impact on many companies and definitely on Solvay. And Solvay brings advancements in planes, in cars, in batteries for EV, hybrids, hydrogen, smart and medical devices. We purify water, air. So we are solving critical industrial and social and environmental challenges. And you can count on our innovative solutions to contribute to a cleaner and safer, sustainable future. And a more competitive Europe will eventually have a positive impact on Solvay's ability to grow and successfully develop the solutions of tomorrow.
I guess the immediate question that follows is, how could these Europe First policies really be applied in a positive way? And how can European companies like Solvay use them to their advantage?
In my mind, the European Commission should develop, and I know it's a holistic approach that prioritizes competitiveness and innovation. Boost the single market to make Europe fit for the digital age, right? And to responsibly deliver the Green Deal. And Europe can extend its position in key strategic sectors, such as robotics, AI, the artificial intelligence, the industrial Internet of Things. We need that as companies like Solvay needs these Internet of Things, industrial one, smart appliances, the development of mobile communication standards such as 5G. We talk about our dependence on other countries on 5G, the quantum computing, edge computing, which is important for our company. So equally important is the promotion of environmental friendly technologies like renewables, right? Energy efficiency, biotechnology, which lay the foundation for a new era of European industrial leadership. So any decoupling, or I would call it renationalization of supply chains related to a protectionist interpretation of technological sovereignty could reinforce the trend towards economic nationalism and deprive European companies of their international business space. And as many of our trading partners, Europe is highly dependent on free trade again. And European businesses are highly incorporated in global value chain with many companies positioned all along the value chain. So Europe should first defend a global and multilateral trade and investment approach. That's my conviction. And reshoring supply chains must deliver a more resilient and diversified supply chain. Reshoring is a complex and a long-term project that comes with a high level of investment support needs, where conversion and conflicting interests also need to be balanced. So if the hurdles which pushed for offshoring in the first place remain, then the trend will not automatically invert, right? And for example, the Batteries Alliance, it's a great example of that.
You mentioned the possible impacts on value chains and even supply chains. Do you think there will be significant changes ahead in the way that you are structuring and managing operations at a global level? Do you expect to bring more activities back to Europe?
The recent COVID-19 outbreak demonstrated in a way the interconnectedness, right, of the global value chain and led to growing concerns over supply chain disruption. But actually already pre-COVID-19 became gradually apparent that in Europe, many strategic sectors such as information and communication technology, energy, mobility, health, space, are increasingly reliant on third countries, right? Components, platforms, and raw materials. Some critical national infrastructure, be it hardware and software in Europe, are built outside of the EU. So it's unrealistic, though, to design and produce all components of a product or use only European technology. I applaud Europe's approach to climate, right? And this approach on climate policy needs to take into account of other major world economies. Europe faces the challenges of greening European production, while at the same time avoiding carbon and investment leakage and rising imports of products with a potentially higher carbon footprint, right? Europe risks failing behind in the digital transformation, which is currently dominated by US and Chinese giants, and insufficient investments in the digital infrastructure and skills, as well as regulatory barriers or uncertainty, can slow down the EU digital transformation. All in all, Europe's industrial companies are part of the solution to implement, for example, the EU Green Deal. At the same time, they need to remain strong and competitive, as otherwise there is a little hope of sustaining the high living standards of an aging society, or of successfully transitioning to a digitalized, sustainable, climate neutral future. Rather than copying what exists in other regions, I call Europe to differentiate, right? To innovate. And the beauty is that Europe is full of talent. We have one of the best schools in Europe. We have academia, we have strong innovation, and with regulatory, which is often in Europe, has been ahead of other regions in the world. It calls on to those innovations to happen quicker than in other places in the world.
Maybe if we shift a little bit onto the R&D perspective. Solvay is a very significant investor. I think it's over 330 million that you invest in R&D every year. There are concerns that corporate R&D investment and indeed national investments are slowing down in the crisis. What's the prospects for investment for you in the research space?
It's crucial for us to not only invest, but invest in the right spaces, the right markets, and anticipate the unmet needs. So yeah, I mean, the COVID-19, obviously the pandemic and its ensuing economic crisis is a tragedy for many. And you know, we've seen in the value chain, many of our customers, suppliers, and small SMEs struggling, and that's important that EU supports, you know, sectors like aerospace, automotive, etc., because there have been a lot of damage to the economy. But we at Solvay, we are, you know, we have strong balance sheet, liquidities, and we know that we are going to emerge stronger. And believe it or not, we use this crisis, you know, to really rethink our way of innovating. We accelerated, for example, our recycling battery project during the crisis. And we just announced an alliance with Veolia, a leading waste management company. And we've seen, you know, some of the projects maybe have been frozen because of lack of the, you know, immediate needs, but the opportunity is huge for people to really reimagine and reinvent you know, themselves. And that's what we are doing at Solvay. We call it learn and relearn. Definitely our roadmap is extremely bold and aggressive. And I invite you to look at Solvay One Planet, which are our, you know, it's our sustainability roadmap. And it includes this circularity, bold decision, you know, again, abandoning coal, decreasing our pressure on biodiversity. We are one of the first companies in our sector who have pledged that we will decrease the, you know, the pressure on biodiversity by 30% between now and 2030. We are, you know, we are moving ahead, and innovation R&D is extremely essential, right? Not only to emerge stronger from a given crisis, but actually become that immortal brand.
Thank you once again, and we wish you very well.
Thank you very much, Simon, and wish you all a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you to Simon again, and to Ilham Kadri, who was recorded later in the afternoon over the weekend. And I want to just pick on one point she said, and the question posed by Simon said, is it relevant to Solvay? And I think it's a question that many companies across Europe are asking themselves, is it relevant to us? So I may just turn it over to Nathalie and ask, is it relevant to Airbus?
Good afternoon, Carlos, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this exchange. Well, actually, it's very much relevant for Airbus, as you could guess, but I may explain why. I think there are three reasons. The first one is, of course, Airbus is a European company in terms of DNA, but we are as well a global champion. If you look at our backlog, we are exporting 80% of the backlog outside of Europe. So our ability to export, our competitiveness on the worldwide stage is very important. Therefore, we should be careful about our environment and the decision about technology. However, the specificities of the aerospace sector is that obviously the dual technologies play a very important role, and the political agenda linked to the security and defense of the citizen, we all know play an important role as well. Therefore, there is a mission as well associated with a company like Airbus. The third item I would like to quote, and which explains why it's so relevant for us, is what our competitors are doing. Because obviously in the US and China, the idea of sovereignty is very much developed, as you know, and there is a real action towards protecting technology in these circumstances. So if we look at the investment cycle, the subsidies, if we look at foreign investment screening, CFIUS or other measures, if you look at the export regulations, I mean, there is an ecosystem, a regulation environment by our competitor, and we have to deal with that. So it's very important for us that to build a level playing field on that field as well. So on one side, to be cautious, to be open to free trade and partnerships. Aerospace and defense is about partnership as well. But on the other hand, to ensure the level playing field.
Yeah, thank you for that. The level playing field is something I think that comes up pretty often. It's not that Europe has invented the idea of Europe first. It has invented Europe first, but not first. Let me turn over to another part of the world here, to the Americas, Philippe. I mean, you know the inside perspective from companies that do global business out of Europe, but have very little actual European business. So they may look at those policies differently from companies that do most of their business locally, but also you're leading an institution that has many partnerships across the world with many companies in Europe. So if you hear those concepts, if you read about them, you probably care. Give us an idea of what's on your mind when you see these developments.
Yes, thank you for your question. Good afternoon, everyone. Well, for us, it's not very realistic, frankly speaking. Whether it's industrial R&D or university R&D, the amount of public funding is quite large, and it's open by construction. So when you want to put some regions, I would say, in the forefront, well, it may work, but actually it's not the way it works. Well, if I take the example of my own university, I mean, we are working with a Chinese company that are advocating China first. And we are working, of course, with, and I'm thinking of Huawei, of course. We are working with Airbus, we're working with Safran, with Thales. Three examples where based in Europe, but where the business is really global. So being in Canada, we are a very open country. We live with a big neighbor in the south, and who is now, I would say, advocating America first. And, well, when you look at it bluntly, it's a nationalistic policy appealing to a subset of US voters, a twist of populism behind this. But the consequence is that it's triggering a trade war, and that gets a lot of negative consequences. And if I look at universities, attractivity is less than it was, or might be. You can see already the trends there. So it's quite even dangerous for the competitiveness of the US. And you may argue that America first was maybe an answer to China first, because the Chinese, our Chinese friends, have been doing the same with nationalistic policy to bring back the grandeur of China of the 14th and 15th century. They are seeking a technological, I would say, leadership with upfront and aggressive competition. So, you know, we are living. Canada is a very open country, and we are not not at ease with those type of attitudes, I would say. You know, we strive being the best, and Europe is a very strong intellectual powerhouse. And I believe, why not replacing Europe first by Europe best?
Thank you. That's an interesting proposal. I think we're going to make that an official one that comes out of the conference here. So but let me follow up on that before I hand over back to Nathalie again. Say, well understood, positively understood, what could be the merits of something that comes under the banner of Europe first or whatever first, but isn't of the aggressive type you were mentioning? What is the kind of like, what are things that are actually the right things to do, and maybe they just get that stamp of, hey, this is what we call Europe first. Well, what are things where it has merit?
Yeah, well, in fact, as you said in your introduction, I spent 8 years in Europe in the big industry, in the energy industry, which is of course completely global. I would say that looking back at these years and with my own experience as a professor, emphasizing local content and offering a united playground to launch products and services are not bad ideas. And again, as a university president, we have a lot of innovations coming from our universities, and often we lack this broad-based, broad playground, free playground to play with. So yeah, that's one. The second thing, it may bring new opportunities to strengthen and reinforce technology-driven companies, and also to reindustrialize. And this is especially true in Europe, which has lost a lot of, I would say, industry which were exported in Asia. It's true as well for Canada, but Europe suffered a lot on this. But for me, the real subject is how you move innovation to the marketplace, and how you can use public funding to encourage industries to invest more in R&D. Europe is really lagging behind North America. And so if that can help with this, well, that's excellent. So yes, well managed, there are merits.
Yeah, cool. I mean, well managed, maybe that is the term. Nathalie, if everything is well managed and we're doing the right things and sort of like avoid the mistakes, what is the good side of something that maybe fall under the banner of Europe first, but really is a program to strengthen the continent in a global context?
Yeah, I think I would agree. It's about excellence in the first place. How do you build excellence in Europe, and in a sector like aeronautics, where Europe is not lagging behind? And we are able, because we collectively work together in investing at the right time, taking the risk, managing a pan-European supply chain, pan-European engineering resources, to be able to be a leader on the worldwide stage. So this is what we should aim for. It means we need to be clever. It means we need to invest, and we need to be a bit strategic in the way we look at the technology portfolio. Where do we need to be autonomous? Where do we absolutely need to monitor the key technology? And where do we decide that maybe it's good to partner? It's good enough. I think we should have a certain level of flexibility, of course, but nowadays there are a lot of discussion about the strategic autonomy, and the concept of open strategic autonomy actually is appealing in a sense, because this is what you were describing. It's not necessarily to be protectionist, but it's to be able to master some technologies, to be able to have a big playground indeed, where you can invest and have enough economies of scales when you invest to start. Because the contrary to that is doing nothing, fragmentation, countries buying off-the-shelf foreign products, which are sometimes subsidized. So it's not a very appealing word either. So you need to be clever and work on the right conditions, be bold which is probably a weakness of Europe, not taking enough risk, put the innovation at the forefront, and I think we were able in some sectors to show the way, and after that be able to develop great products, which are, as I said, being exported across the world.
Yeah, there's one more aspect. You said we have been successful in some sectors. Everybody has his or her kind of like best example in mind. Let me follow up on fragmentation. Now, the world can be fragmented, and maybe it's getting more fragmented, but Europe itself is fragmented as well. Are we making the best use of the size of the European economic environment? I mean, very often it's said, yes, countries with large population and large GDP, right? They just have a natural advantage because they can start selling home first and before they go global. And then you look at Europe and say, like, look, we are still the largest economic zone globally. Are we taking sufficient advantage of it, right? That could be a Europe first thing, means let's make sure we understand what our strengths are. How do you see that? I mean, sure, your market is global.
Yeah, no, our market is global, but you see, look at the defense market, where fragmentation is much more of a weakness. It is obvious that if the different European countries are buying off-the-shelf non-European equipment, we cannot, as an industry, build the economy of scales. So this is a huge disadvantage, and not being able to have a common specification, common investment, that puts us into a very difficult position in terms of worldwide competition. So indeed, Europe first could be as well that if there's a technology developed in Europe, if there's an efficient product, why not trying to have a European preference on some very high-level technological equipment, which give, by the way, on top of that, to the European politician, some ability to act, to decide freely, because sometimes, and we should recall that, when technologies are developed outside Europe, you cannot use them completely freely, or you cannot have access to the source of the software. So you see, it's not as if when you buy off the shelf, there was not no consequence on your ability to decide and to act freely. So why not trying to, yes, put this European first or European best? For me, this is linked anyway, because we can only have European first if we are best in class, and try to build these economies of scales and avoid fragmentation.
Thank you. This is you made a very good case for the demand side, if you will, of the economy. Now let me switch over, talking to someone from a university, to the supply side of technology. Some countries, really small in this world, have done a very fine job in putting themselves at the forefront of a variety of technologies, and they have nothing like an internal market to even speak of. Philippe, from your standpoint, Europe first, well understood. What does it mean in terms of feeding new things and how to do this well? Are we also too fragmented in terms of the startup that grows in Berlin, Paris, or Dublin is just kind of too limited? There's little reach to other countries. It's very hard to get access to markets because of language barriers and other reasons. Could this be overcome somehow? What are your thoughts?
Yes, I mean, you are mentioning those small countries doing extremely well, from Finland to Israel to Singapore, and number like those. Well, I believe probably the first thing is freedom. Freedom, access to capital is important, and having smart leaders and smart politicians. Don't smile. In fact, fragmentation is very risky because you can't simply strengthen the competitions who are not fragmented and remain open and attractive. There is, for me, something quite important, which is the risk of falling into the traps of building walls and barriers, and especially trying to protect sectors which are weak and which are prone to disappear because of lack of competitiveness. And certainly the aerospace industry is not in Europe, but there are others that are, very obviously. there is a risk as well of becoming transactional, you know, a la Trump, rather than keeping a holistic view. So, so keeping pragmatic and listening to opportunities is for me very, very important. And in the country that have adopted this attitude, the startups have become success stories.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is the whole startup environment is something that I would say should receive very special attention in context of Europe First policies. The demand side as well, as we discussed, but also I think the early stage things, the fuzzy front end, if you will, of where the new things start developing, the cradle of innovation in a sense. Now let's to the flip side, just briefly from your side. If ill-implemented, poorly implemented, if the wrong choices are made, what are the threats? What should not happen? Let me phrase it like that. And maybe start with you, Nathalie. If this goes wrong, what are the risks, and what should they? Hey, don't do this.
Yeah, I think we shouldn't mix responsibilities, and you see, industries knows best where to localize its investment, and I don't think politicians should necessarily, because for a legitimate concern of security of supply, try to take the helm of the investment side and the production and the localization. So it shouldn't be building a fortress Europe and prevent partnerships, because as I said, I mean, part of the excellence and being best is as well the ability to partner and work with the best in the world. So I don't think it should be a problem. It shouldn't be resulting in killing international partnership, and that would be a mistake. In the as well, we are for free trade, so we need international trade to be live and kicking. So for me, Europe first is not necessarily bad. It could be a very good thing. It shouldn't be Europe only. And we saw in other regions of the world maybe a temptation from going to first to only, and I think this would be the risk.
Yeah, thank you, Philippe. From your standpoint, I mean, you're seeing things going in different parts of the world in a similar direction. Maybe your word of caution, what to avoid, right? If it's poorly implemented, what's the risk?
Well, I agree with Nathalie. I mean, the risk is getting weaker at the end of the day. In fact, geopolitics has also an R&D side, and sometimes it's quite large depending on the countries where you are. So if you do not keep open, if you do not keep, I would say, listening to partners, if you are really willing to do everything by yourself, then the risk is that you close. First you close your mind, and you do not become attractive anymore. And you know, at the end, it's people and manpower. If you do not have the right talents, because you don't attract them anymore, then your future is going to be bleak.
It's hard to take the crystal ball and say what's going to happen or what's going to change in the future. But still, I mean, maybe if I can ask you a question, what would it take to change the sentiment that we see globally today towards more regionalization, more shutting ourselves off from others, trying to find happiness and in our own destiny? What do you think, Philippe? What does it take?
Well, COVID-19 has not helped us, huh? So, well, right now I would say the mood is not very positive, but we have to go beyond this, and difficult to say. I mean, work hard and talk to each other and try to build all together.
We'll come to a few recommendations for policymakers in the next session now, but while we do that, let me bring back Ilham Kadri into the discussion here. And she was asked the question, what recommendations do you have for policymakers about how to implement technological sovereignty? And then maybe the three of us here can also follow up on that discussion after we've heard what she had to say about it. So please, start the film.
It's important that there is a framework and the right condition to facilitate, the development. And again, it has to go with the creation of level playing field and an attractive business environment. That's number one. Number two, the approach to climate, right? And again, it's important that Europe continues, in the execution of the Green Deal, while at the same time avoiding carbon leakage and any rising imports of products with higher carbon footprint potentially. Three is the digital transformation, as I mentioned. It's extremely important. There are insufficient investments in digital infrastructure these days, and we need the skills to allow Europe to drive the digital transformation and allow us in Europe, right, to adopt those tools, have the right skills to really execute our own digital transformation. And we are all part of it. I mean, the industrial companies have to engage with Europe, and we are doing it. I mean, during this crisis, I've never talked that often to the EU Commission or with the head of states and, with the researcher and innovators about our challenges and how we can build a common vision about how to remain strong and competitive. Otherwise, there is little hope of sustaining again the living standards. So it's collaboration and partnerships are extremely important.
Yeah, I think a couple of good points that Ilham made here. Let me turn now to my two guests on the live session, starting out with Nathalie. I mean, kind of like straight from almost your daily business, I assume. The question, what do you recommend to policymakers how to implement European tech sovereignty in a smart way?
Yes, well, I think, Carlos, you made a good point. The atmosphere is very gloomy. The COVID-19 is putting at least aeronautics in an unprecedented crisis. But on the other hand, for me, hope comes from the fact that Europe has a project on transport and sustainable transport. So it can show the way politically, provided it is able as well to put the money where the mouth is. And therefore, we need investment in new technology, replacement of aircraft. There's a lot which can be done by investing. And not only talking, not only regulating, but really taking the risk and investing in the future. I think that's probably the most important part to develop biofuel, to develop hydrogen, to foster the change. We are in a period of change, so let's take the benefit of it. That's very difficult, but for me, that's the most important part, to be the best, as Philippe was saying. But on the other hand, it doesn't prevent to set up the right toolbox in terms of preserving a certain level of strategic autonomy of tools on extraterritoriality, on cloud acts, on investment, to be sure that the level playing field is protected, so that you can play in an open way with a partnership mind, but as well not letting the others by what you have very much developed by yourself, and therefore protecting the European citizen. So I think if there's enough courage to go for investment with a good political project, we are in a period of change which could be interesting to find the right balance.
Yeah, so it's an interesting point that you say, kind of like, if we do it well, we tie it to specific initiatives, investment initiatives, things that have to happen anyhow. And that's going to hopefully, I would say, rally resources and make people focus on the right things, yeah. and attract at the same time. And
attract the best in Europe and outside Europe, because you can inspire them. And this is what we are about, inspiring on aeronautics.
Yeah, thank you, Nathalie. Philippe, your view on, well done, what should policymakers focus on if they want to do it right?
Well, first, I tend to recommend my own policymakers, not the policymakers of others. But no, having said that, I believe that Europe has to consider collaborating with partners and friends. And Canada is certainly a very good partner and a friend country. And so the best is, let's work all together. and let's share the people, let's share the manpower, let's share the results, let's share the wealth. And I believe we are very compatible in terms of mindset, in terms of interest. So that's the best that may happen.
Philippe, maybe just one question to someone from a university here. Isn't science isn't science always open and sharing, since publishing is such an important piece of science that almost nothing is being withheld in science from access to other parts of the world? Is that going to stay, or will we see more restrictive publishing policies?
No, I don't think we will see restrictions on publications. We may see delays on publications. That's already happening, and it's not a recent phenomenon. Patents are important as long as you are ready to defend them, by the way, which is probably not something that you used to do in universities, but that's something to be considered. No, I don't. I believe we are, as I started with, by essence, we are working in an open, I would say, a system. So we are sharing ideas instantaneously over the world with the internet. So putting barriers and borders and qualifications like being the first in something is not very productive.
Thanks to you both for a clear plea for openness, for keeping the good things that have developed over the decades and making sure that we don't go overboard with some of the ideas which actually have merit, and we discussed it. I want to thank also Ilham Kadri for her contribution over the video. Thank my colleague Simon for his support here. I hope you, the audience, found it interesting. Thanks for joining. And I think this discussion is going to keep all of us busy for quite some time to come. This will not go away anytime